Well, greetings, fellow truth seekers, and welcome once again to Passion for the Paranormal, bringing a passion for the paranormal to you. I'm your host, Curry Stegan, and it's wonderful to be back here with you once again. In my new book, Walking in the Shadows of Strangers, I document my journey from a curious skeptic to a believer in the paranormal, and I cover my personal experiences as a paranormal investigator at over 20 haunted locations, some of which are even a little bit creepy and unsettling. If you'd like to get the Kindle version of my new book, you can go to Amazon and reserve your copy. If you do so prior to this Wednesday, the 15th of March, you can get a discount on it. If you want to order the paperback version, you have to wait till Wednesday, 15 March. You can go to my website to order the book. There's a link there at Passion, the number 4, theparanormal.com, or you can simply type my name in on Amazon, and you'll find my book there and you can order it. So I'm really eager to get into a discussion with my next guest. His name is Ryan Stacey. He's Canadian, and Ryan has been involved or been interested in the paranormal for some time. He was also the former chief of MUFON for Canada. He runs the Experiencer Support Association, and he is the host of the Beyond the Tinfoil Hat podcast. So on his show, he delves into all kinds of strange stuff. And so really eager to get into a discussion with Ryan. Whatever podcast app you happen to be using out there, please just make sure when you're tuning into the show, you hit that subscribe button and, copy a link, share it with a friend, family member, coworker, let them know about it. And as I said, I'm really eager to get into the discussion with Ryan. I think it's going to be a great one. And really hope you're going to enjoy tonight's show. And thank you so much for tuning into the show. Okay, so joining me today is Ryan Stacey. Ryan is a certified private investigator, and he is the president and founder of the Experiencer Support Association. He is also the host of the Beyond the Tinfoil Hat podcast and several other media programs. Previously worked with MUFON as the Director of Field Investigator Training, National Chief Investigator for MUFON in Canada. Ryan, pretty impressive resume you have there, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's good to have you on, and I want to really get into what this Experiencer Support Association is about. And talking about what you guys do with that. But true to form, I always got to hear the backstory. And maybe if you could kind of take us back to how this journey started for you, because I know you were a private investigator and you were involved in kind of law enforcement type work, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, I'm still a private investigator. I own a private security and investigating firm. It's 8 years old. So I still do that. I've always been a paranormal individual, but I got introduced to UFOs through MUFON Canada. And the way that happened, while I was looking for clients with the private investigation company, I took on a case where someone believed that their son was abducted by aliens. And the reason why I took it is because they were willing to pay me to look for their son. So it's just a general locate, but I didn't believe they were actually abducted by aliens because I didn't believe in all that stuff then. So I ended up finding out that the person just joined Scientology. So I located the son, brought the family back together, but I joined all these groups, like social media groups and whatnot that had the conversation, so I was able to track this guy down. And then eventually someone else had an issue with not receiving a manual from an American company, and they were, concerned about it being fraud. So I looked into it. Turns out it was MUFON. I got it sorted out because it was just a shipping issue because they were waiting from the States to send it to Canada. So I'm Canadian. So when I dealt with that, I got introduced to the organization because Stu Bundy at the time was essentially had asked me how I do this stuff for real, and we've got talking. He asked me about UFOs, and I said, "Aren't those like ancient like Chinese spy balloons and things like that?" Which it actually turns out to be today. And we had a laugh, and then I got into it, and I moved through the ranks because I'm a trained investigator. I know what I'm doing, and then eventually became the director of field investigator training for MUFON National. So I was responsible for writing the next volume for the field investigator manual and teaching everybody how to investigate unidentified flying objects. I left the organization. Which I don't really want to speak due to conflict of interest per se. I received information about Jan Harzan prior to his arrest. And I had reported it, so that had led to his arrest, and I left the organization because it created a sour taste, and then I created the Experiencer Support Association, which was to continue my work with the Experiencer research team. So that's the career journey. The research journey was me realizing that majority of the cases that I got from MUFON were just lights in the sky. They were machines, they were airplanes, they were helicopters, they were normal things. But then every once in so often we would get an experiencer that talks about being affected by things or harmed and beings, and I was always interested in that more than the craft. But MUFON didn't seem to care too much about that stuff, and they were more focused on the nuts and bolts. So it was still under the umbrella, but it wasn't really associated with MUFON. But I was kind of within those circles. So then, knowing that isn't happening, I decided to create my own organization where it was focusing on experiencers first, because if it wasn't for them reporting, I wouldn't be able to do what I do. None of us will. We wouldn't have anything to talk about or anything to do. So I'm skipping a bunch of things because there's a dark past there, but like
that's all right. We'll get to them.
Yeah.
Hopefully. All right. Well, you mentioned you always kind of had an interest in the paranormal, and I kind of started in the paranormal as a skeptic, and wanted to find out if there was any truth to all these people that had shared their experiences with me. I'm wondering if you had a similar journey. Did you have paranormal experiences when you were younger? What brought you into having interest in the paranormal?
Yeah, so I guess my experiences are more sensational. So I have experienced feeling things that shouldn't be there. I don't see anything. I haven't heard anything. Just these feelings. And back then, it was just I thought it was ghosts. I thought it was all the stuff. But I was curious in the technology. The K2 meters, the EMF meters, which is a bug sweeper essentially for Private Investigator. So I was always fascinated with the technology that was used to capture these creatures that could be on a different spectrum. So I was fascinated by that. On the research side, I've seen some things that are like, that could be coincidence, but that are weird in terms of like objects moving or objects being disheveled or moved, and being witness to knowing that they haven't been moved. So I've seen a bunch of that stuff, but I haven't really seen anything like nuts and bolts and concrete right in front of me. But I have talked to a lot of people, and with my training, I'm able to discern whether or not they're telling the truth and things like that. And there's a lot of belief behind these things. And whether or not I can prove it, there's a lot of strong evidence that suggests that they believe that this is happening. So we got to get into the mental health side of things. So eventually over the years, because I didn't really understand, the UFO thing and the alien thing, but then I got to this point where I thought, well, maybe they're connected. Maybe that's why it's confusing. You're looking at looking at both separately. But what if there's parts from this data that could be useful to help this data? As an example, shadow figures is in that paranormal bracket, but that's simply just a being that is cast a shadow, red eyes, all these other things. But it could be an entity, could be an extraterrestrial, could be a human being. So there's lots of misclassification, categorization happening, and all that other stuff. So that's when I kind of got in the idea that it might be connected. Then, what is it actually an apparition, or is it alien technology, like holographic technology? So I started to create this matrix where it could be either or. It was just we're calling it different things. Then when I was leaving MUFON, because it was really, that's what I said about dark past. What I mean is because I reported a crime, and as a result of the crime, the head of MUFON gets arrested. There's a lot of grief that came with that. Not having a place to go, because the reputation that MUFON has and has had and still has, because it's just one person, the organization can continue as it is. There wasn't really anything for me to go, because I had connections to the experiencers, I had connections to all the investigative tools and all the research that I made, and intellectual property and whatnot. So I was kind of in a sad state where I want to help these people, but I don't know how, and I need this. Someone gave me the idea and was just like, why don't you make your own? And I was just like, yeah, make an international multi-million dollar organization like MUFON. Good luck. But I decided to give it a go. But the thing that happened in there is I had what I call a psychogenic experience, which is the experience of the mind. So I on my website, you can see the actual image, but I received some sort of vision, whether it's telepathic or remote viewing or higher self consciousness. Who knows what the explanation is? But it was this elaborate map, which is what I call it, that just continued stayed in my mind, and I held on to it for a couple of days because I couldn't get it out. Piercing headache, all these other things, and blah blah blah. And then eventually I had to put it on paper, and when I put it on paper, I started feeling better. I got it out of my mind, and I didn't know at the time what had happened. I didn't know anything about consciousness. I didn't know anything about interdimensions, all that other stuff. I couldn't grasp the concept of that because I didn't see any of it in the research. But then yet I had this what we would call like a download experience. Now this graphic that I've created has many geographic symbols on it, has many different colors on it, and it looks random. However, over the years after displaying it, I've learned that within this, it actually unlocks and answers a whole bunch of questions, some conspiracy theories and things like that I have going on. So, and the Experiencers Support Association came from that, because the letters TESA were around the center of it. And I had this idea, all of a sudden, meditating on it, and I come up with all these ideas. It's hard to explain without looking at it, but throughout the years, I started to realize that this map, as I call it, you can put the zodiac over top of it. It fits in a lot of things that I had to learn. And the thing that makes it woo for me, the odd part of it, is that I'm speaking now because I've learned the connection through this map. But at the time, I know I didn't know any of this. So through this experience, I started to learn really in-depth stuff within the paranormal and consciousness spectrum, and then I was able to apply that to the UFO and alien kind of scenario, and I've created what's called the ultraspectrum classification system. And what that is just a way to take all of these different phenomenons and break it down into a category that all sides can understand. So as an example, let me see here, aerial phenomenon. So you can call that a UFO, UAP, those are labels. We call it aerial activity, and it's either a machine or a light. So if it's a machine, then that's what we're looking for. If it's a light, that's what we're looking for. If you want to call it a UAP, if you want to call it a UFO, you want to call it a paranormal orb, you want to call it, a spirit, you're welcome to do that. But we all have to agree that it's aerial activity and it resembles a light, and that's what we need to categorize them at before we put these labels on. Another example, beings observed. So you could see a 4 foot tall, pale skinned being, which we call the Greys, but that gray label is just something that was applied based on how it resembles. So it's a being that was observed that's bipedal because it stands on 2 legs. So then we're kind of recategorizing everything and grouping it together. And then once I got into the psychogenic part, the stuff of the mind, I'm realizing in terms of collecting evidence that there are experiencers out there that, like myself, that are seeing these things in their mind, and it's not in reality, but yet it still exists because it's being pulled from the same place, which I call the ultra spectrum, which is the ether or wherever, whatever's out here. And what was interesting about that, starting to connect the dots, is I started talking to a lot of people that have these mental experiences, no pictures, no evidence, but when they draw similar things, almost identical things, and they're from different places of the world, different areas. So then that becomes a coincidence, like a strong coincidence, but also corroborating evidence. And so as I'm building my cases and things like that over the years, I'm starting to see these patterns, and there's evidence of this place where this information is coming from. Where and when and how, like that's for the experts. But I'm simply trying to figure out and dial down who the suspects are, because as a detective, in kind of scenario, in order to locate someone or something, we need to understand all those properties to determine where they might be. So I've been on this rabbit hole for a while now.
Yeah. So how long ago did this? When you were talking, the thought that came to mind for me was a download, and then you mentioned it probably 5 seconds after I had that thought.
So like, I mean, that's the point. Is just like there's different labels that are applied to very similar things. Like it's just consciousness contact. Download is one way to do it. I call it psychogenic experience. Because it's just simply experience of the mind, because I don't know, like a download implies that I'm literally taking information from something and receiving it, which is the act of it, but there's no proof of the intent of where it's coming from. So so psychogenic, so mind activity is just kind of more general. And it's important to remove those labels, because then we won't have these biases or these opinions. So if you see these beings, and I'm looking at all these beings together as an example, I'll see a pattern of these cloaks, or I'll see this pattern of these red eyes. I'll see these patterns of these large heads. But when the experiencers report and I ask them to identify it based on what they interpret it to be, they're not on the same page. One will call it a ghost, one would call it an alien, one would call it a being, a demon, right? But when you look at them all, they all look the same. So what's different is that these individuals, have different walks of life, different beliefs, different understandings, different education. And so they might be mislabeling them, but they're all seeing the same thing, and they all, in some cases, the cases I'm referring to, when I say all, not all of them, but all in this sample, all use the form of meditation or some sort of activity of their mind to intentionally receive this information. And they're all seeing the same thing. So that's strange. That's odd. And that's what I like. The MUFON stuff was great. It's a good buffer. It's a good start for anybody who wants to get into investigations to kind of learn. But you're not gonna, like this rabbit hole that I'm in, you're not gonna learn that from MUFON at all.
Right. The thing that I wanted to ask is, so in terms of the UFO, UAP, whatever label you want to apply to it, it sounds like you kind of came into this from a little different perspective until just by happen chance you happened to, through your investigation, come in contact with MUFON. What was kind of your viewpoint on the UFO/UAP subject prior to that and making that connection?
Prior to MUFON?
Yes.
Yeah, so like I didn't get it. I didn't see any reason for concern. It just didn't, like I watched X-Files, I watched Star Trek, I like totally into those shows, and I love the space shows. I wanted to be an astronaut at some point, like I'm pretty sure all of us wanted to do that at some point in our lives. But like I never once believed that this UFO phenomenon that we're experiencing in present time was associated with extraterrestrials. Now, that doesn't mean I don't believe in extraterrestrials and these crafts that that our experiencers are seeing. I just don't think it's connected to this government thing. I think that's separate, and it could be like what some call a psyop, or some sort of system to distract us from us reaching our higher potential, raising our vibration, and becoming, stronger and better human beings.
Yeah. So getting back to this, again, I'm going to go back to the label of download because I'm not sure, or the psychogenic experience. I'm kind of interested too. I started in the paranormal, and you'll often find that people use the paranormal label in a very narrow definition, if you will. You know, when they say paranormal, they're usually thinking of ghosts and hauntings.
The word paranormal means not normal. So technically UFOs from that you don't understand, those are technically paranormal. Anything we don't understand is paranormal.
And I agree. And you know, if you look up the textbook definition, it's anything beyond the normal scientific understanding of things. So that can be any of these unexplained things. And, you know, you mentioned kind of going down the rabbit hole. When I started doing this podcast, I started with some interest in the UFO subject before I ever got in the paranormal. I was more skeptical about ghosts and hauntings than I was about UFOs, because I did have a sighting when I was young. And, you know, it stuck with me. It was the only sighting I ever had. It stuck with me, but perhaps that also kind of opened to my mind that, you know, there may be things going on, even though I was a little bit skeptical, or maybe I'll say a curious skeptic when it came to the paranormal, but maybe that kind of helped open my mind down the road to the possibility of, you know, ghosts and hauntings and that sort of thing going on. And just like you, I'm interested in, hey, where's these things, where's kind of the nexus between this kind of phenomena going on?
The other thing that I've learned over the years too is the approach that everyone takes in terms of investigating. And that's partially why I excelled in the ranks within MUFON very quickly and very high, because I was focusing on proper investigations. But a lot of people push towards their beliefs or their biases because they want to either debunk it intentionally or they want to prove that it exists because they hadn't experienced themselves. Most people have experiences, and the reason why they become field investigators is because they want to find answers for what happened to them. And you know, and that's very, very typical, but they're biased in some way. So within my career, always prepping evidence for court, as you know, on a daily basis, tethering that line is very important, very hard. And personally, I have gone down these rabbit holes, and I had to get myself back up, and for some things, you know, like it's tough. But like these what was I going to say, into the paranormal stuff. And I think the point I was trying to make is that the evidence that is available versus the evidence that they want. So as an example, the journalist wants to have the video and wants to have the video first and write the article and have it posted at 7 o'clock in the morning to get that clickbait so he gets paid because everyone's looking at it. Doesn't care about the experience or testimony because he can't, you know, it's just a story. But all this evidence is important. And when you build this case and you work with these individuals, you start to learn that there's more information when you spend time, but a lot of these investigators are just quickly looking for a result so they can create and monetize. And the heart isn't in there. Now, there is some heart with some, you know, some of the pseudosciences like Reiki and hypnotherapy, and even, some for treatment and stuff like that, which is another part of the Experiential Support Association, is to refer people that are negatively affected by the phenomenon to people that can help treat these traumas. Without stereotyping them or anything like that. So it's like it's a real big mess, because when I do my investigations, I've been looking at it as if it's crime. I don't look at it as if it's paranormal, as ghosts or aliens are cool or woo. I look at it like, okay, so you had somebody in your room, so that's trespassing. You were alone, that's against the law. Or you were abducted, that's against the law. You were sexually assaulted, that's against the law. So my approach is not to look for beings. My approach is to look for humans that might be responsible for that. And when I have that mindset, when I do my investigation, I can narrow down to a lot of things and explain them. But when I get to these weird ones that can't be explained, then I start to believe. But in one situation, I had an experiencer report that they were sexually molested by an extraterrestrial at a young age, and they carried it until they were like 70. I think she was 74. And then she finally went to hypnotherapy because I referred her to that, and we went through that. So the belief for, you know, at least 70 years, let's say, that this entity is what molested her, and she carried that, and then she finally felt comfortable to share that with me, and then we explored it and all these other things. But when she went to regression and brought back to that time, she didn't describe an extraterrestrial being. She described a human male. And when they got into the details and the characteristics of what the male looked like, turned out that that was a description of her stepfather. So in reality, she was sexually molested by her stepfather. But through the trauma, she created this idea that it was extraterrestrial and lived with that for 70 years. And so there is a lot of misconception in with all this other stuff, but every once in a while you'll get something that's strange and odd, and it's like a 5% of it is just impossible to explain. And what I mean by that is, after I've ruled out the credibility, I try to prove the credibility of the witness, establish that if alcohol was consumed, that it wasn't enough to impact the statement. If they're on any medication, it wasn't enough doesn't matter. And that's another thing too. When the journalists, like a lot of people look at alcohol use and diagnosis, like schizophrenia, for an example, as red flags for credible witnesses. They can be used for that, but if you're a good investigator, you can prove that those don't have anything to do with the statement if you have a good piece of evidence. You could be batshit crazy in the psych ward, but have a picture that can be authenticated from something you saw in the sky. So there's a lot of that avoidance that's happening in the mainstream. And the work that I do takes time. It takes I'm a private UFO and paranormal investigator, and I work with these people privately. And I'm hoping to be able to show some of my research in a 4-year study, almost 5 years now, to actually explain, the patterns and whatnot.
Yeah, and talk about, so you have this system, you talk about the ultra spectrum classification. How are you correlating data?
So like, how am I bringing it all together?
Yes.
Yeah, so I allow the experiencer to report it as they understand it. I will then break it down and I will recategorize it to fit in whatever one that it meets. So, like an example, if they say like I was visited by a reptilian, so I call something called the paranormal hat trick. So I was visited by a reptilian. It spoke to me in my mind, and then it took me on top on this spaceship ride. That's just like 3 things there. So I would need the experiencer to A, make a report about the being, B, make a report about the telepathy, and C, make a report about this craft, because all 3 of those need to be investigated separately. One would be aerial activity, one would be being observed, and the other one would be psychogenic. So there's 3 different categories, right? So then I investigate each of those separately. Rule 1, if I can rule them all out, then rule 1 out, then you probably rule the rest out. But if all of them are kind of in that sync, then they're all connected, and then we kind of break it apart that way. But when I get enough of the data and I start looking at these individual groups, then I really have to measure. That is just giving me a category of what these people are experiencing on the other side. My real study is more so from the psychographics that I get from the reports that tell me, their age, their blood type, if they're willing to share it, their eye color, all these demographics as well, that help me establish a pattern to determine, if there's a matrix that allows a certain biological being to have these types of experiences. And what I've learned is, especially when these experiencers report at different times. So that's another thing too. So it's like, if you're reporting today an experience you had back in 72 or something, that's the random number that came up. This is real time, but then I would ask you to report everything that has happened in your life if possible, because then once I have all the cases of things that could have happened to you, then I have this timeline. And the pattern, that's the big pattern that I'm seeing, is at an early age, there is some sort of contact. Then later on, there's some sort of, I don't know if it's a UFO sighting or space sighting, or sorry, craft sighting in the sky. Later on in life, there's psychogenic activity, so poltergeist activity, and then further on in life, they start seeing apparitions or they become a medium, and then further on and through the life, almost next to death, near-death experiences, or tarot card readings, and all these other things. So these are all different events within the spectrum. A lot of it paranormal, one of them UFO, but the pattern is it starts with contact. And then the evidence that I'm trying to, and I got to work with my experts on this to finalize the data once it's done, is my theory is something did happen where contact was made years ago, and what we have now is a result of evolution. So we are the beings, our minds have evolved, and over the years we were not accepting it. The strange thing was the experiments happening in the Cold War and all this other stuff and blah blah blah, Roswell, all the timings, all that stuff could have happened and then it stopped. But now there's an effect to whatever they were doing. So if I'm able to prove that, then I'm able to prove or suggest that there's human involvement. And if there's human involvement, then you can make an arrest. So that's just kind of giving an idea of my approach, because if I can't confirm that there's aliens in space because I can't get to space.
Right.
I can't confirm that there's ghosts in here because I've used the devices and there's a lot of contaminating evidence, and it's hard to even with EVPs. Anyone could like fart down the road and you could pick it up, and if you didn't see it, and then all of a sudden you believe it's a ghost. It's really hard to get these evidence. So I focus on the things that I can measure, and that's the people. And I learn more about the phenomenon by studying the people than I ever have by studying the phenomenon.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to go back to the psychogenic experience that you had. There's a lot of, when you start getting in the rabbit hole, if you will, like we were just talking about, of these different types of phenomena, you start getting into things like near-death experiences and, psychic and mediumship abilities and telepathy and all these different kinds of things. But based on your experience, do you think this has kind of sold you more on the idea that consciousness does not reside just here in the brain, but elsewhere?
Yeah, non-local consciousness. Yeah, it would make sense because, like, it's hard to tell, like from personal experience, where thought comes from. It's internal in your brain, and then you receive thought, like it could come external. It could be external. We don't really know, but I do believe or feel that there's some, I would say, a hive consciousness, like some space where we all can tap in, we all can draw from the same source. I just don't think where we think that source is actually where the source is. We might be misguided in that. And the reason why I say that is because there's evidence that shows that we're not even using the proper calendar, because the current calendar that we use today was created after, we used to have a 13-month calendar, which used to have 28 days a month. Like, there's so many different ways to measure time, time zones, all these other things that didn't really exist back then. So when you do these measures, you're not using the right map, you're not using the right right math, you're going to end up with the wrong answer. So there's a lot of things that kind of have changed over the years. And I feel like if we're told to look up, that's where we think God is and everything else is. But it could be inside, it could be in the center of the earth, like the North Pole. There's many locations on earth there's two locations on earth that we don't have access to, and that's Antarctica and that's the North Pole. So hypothetically speaking, if the beings were there and they're communicating with us, and we're thinking they're up there and we focus our thought up there, that's why we're not connecting. But if you believe them to be here on earth and you find a location and you do your remote viewing, and you're focusing on Antarctica or you're focusing on the north, you might be able to see something. So,
now, would that also include beneath us?
yeah, beneath us, of course. Right, and then of course there's what shape is the Earth? There's that is the conspiracy among all conspiracies, and there's many theories, of course, and I'm trying not to go down that rabbit hole, but I mean it's just something that a lot of people aren't consistent. The thing that we should know still has a lot of theory around it. And if there's a hollow earth, if there is a solid earth, if there's a flat earth, if there's like whatever, there still has to be something above and there still has to be something below in order for it to be in a container of some sort. But there's a lot of ideas that have floated around today because of movies and Hollywood and stuff. But if you go back to ancient times and look at what they were drawing and what they were telling us, it makes sense. Like everything is inside this container and that's it. Whatever shape the Earth is or not, that doesn't matter. It's all here, and the dimensions are here, just outer layers. That is a rabbit hole that needs explanation, but I just kind of wanted to summarize that.
Yeah, but there is a lot of that. They've studied it, looked at the ancient sites, and a lot of them are pointing to, say, like the Cygnus constellation, and using similar symbology across the globe. So, does that in itself kind of tell you that even back then they were looking to the heavens and to the stars?
Well, the stars were used for mapping too, like navigation. Because they move. You got Polaris being the fixed star, the North Star not moving. So when these things moved, they could tell time. That's how. Like, I mean, that's the way that it was. But in order for those to move on a fixed axis with the North Star not moving, that would require this planet to not move. So there's a lot of conflicting theories around that, but the point I was trying to make, and this makes perfect sense, is that what our ancestors knew, what we're told today is not real, and what we're told today is allegedly real. But yet, when we believe what our ancestors tells us, it makes sense. But yet, we don't have any way to verify and fact check and believe it because we're told elsewhere. We have all this control now. Another rabbit hole to get into is the Tartaria mudslide or mud flood kind of civilization, where they, this ancient free energy giants roaming, which is now Russia. So like there's lots of things in history that we're not seeing today. So either all of that exists or none of it exists, because they don't say it didn't happen. They're just not talking about it anymore because we're moving forward into the future.
Right.
Yeah, it's hard.
I want to talk a little bit about the the UFO disclosure movement, and I think Red, you're kind of involved in that as well. Talk a little bit about your involvement in the UFO disclosure movement.
Yeah, so I'm Canadian, so I'm focusing on getting information from our Canadian government. For starters, our Canadian government is very cooperative, and they don't redact a lot of things, and they're quite open with their investigations whenever they do so. And in some cases, they identify these objects and they let us know, but they don't announce it in the media. In order to do that, I have to track flight reports from Transport Canada. And whenever they do, so it's civilian aviation daily occurrence reports, whenever that gets spit out once a day, and there's thousands of reports between bird strikes and mistakes and all this other stuff. But every once in a while, they have this category called UFO, and excuse me, it's grouped with balloons and rockets and all those other things. But they have this document called the service document, service. I can't remember, CIRVIS, which is communications, vital communications, which is actually a form that was created, I think, in '54, that was an agreement between Canada and the United States that Canada would, if they intercept anything, they would do their investigation, but then they would fill out this form, and then that information would get passed to NORAD and Cheyenne Mountain. So because we have NORAD in North Bay, and then the United States would take over the investigation. So we actually have to include the United States with these investigations at a certain point. So before it gets transferred over to the States, we do get a little bit of information to get an idea of what's going on, but we don't get the outcome, which is why the push in the States is happening, because if they give us the answers, then we have the answers and all these other things. But yet the Canadian government knows, and they don't want to divulge too much information because that's a partner, and we share borders. And but at the same time, when they don't redact everything. So when I'm looking at these cases, so on my website, I actually, when I upload these documents, I put them in 3 different ways. One is I measure them in time. 2 is I measure them in proximity. And then 3, I measure them, of course, in category. So, I have based on association, actually. So I built, as I get these declassified documents from the government, I will put them on the timeline so I can actually see the order of events once I have all the evidence that exists. Being a private investigator, I know that when I request, you have to know if the evidence exists, first of all, and then you have to know what department would have it. So that took a while to figure out. So knowing what department has the information, you can ask for it, and if they have it, they'll provide it. But when they provide it, most people just, as again with the clickbait, journalists will get it posted and be like, hey, I got this declassified document. Look at me, I'm famous, blah, 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 I did something. And you read it and it's redacted, or it doesn't say anything, doesn't make any sense. What I do is I'll go through it and I'll read it. And I actually have this book here. This is my Canadian Current Event Survey for 2020. I'm working on 2021 and 22 just behind because of COVID. But I'm able to extract information from those documents. So here's an example of one of those documents. But if I measure all the documents and put the pieces together, then I'm able to figure out what it is, or close to what it could be. And the reason why I do that is because I've learned that these people that give us the documents have different criteria for redaction based on the body of the document. Meaning, one document might have certain things redacted because it's sensitive, where another one might. But I'd be able to take the pieces from the one that they relaxed on redacting to be able to identify what was redacted in the other documents. So so when I build the timeline and I build the proximity and I start to see everything, and I also have this association, what people are mentioned, what departments are there, I start to see this pattern. And that's why I'm confident when I say that if the government is involved with extraterrestrials, paranormal, and all that other stuff, what we're seeing in the sky is nowhere close to it. So it has to be something interdimensional, or it has to be something that we can get to without in the physical world. And with this psychogenic download, this download experience that I had, opening that up, if it was the government, hypothetically speaking, then that was intention. That's here, that's a local. I was selected, or I just picked up a frequency that they broadcasted to everyone, and I just happened to pick it up. There's science to explain that in a normal sense. If it's extraterrestrial, whether it's from up in the space or another piece of land that's been hidden from us because we can't go past Antarctica, like whatever scenario might be in place, what evidence concerns me is that if that's extraterrestrial and it's divine, that individual was able to invade my mind. So what would you rather have? The government implant a thought, or an extraterrestrial being from no place that you can, that you can find, and having the ability to communicate with you? So there's no protection there. The ability to do that. So, and because that has happened to me, the reason why I'm thinking this nuts and bolts stuff isn't reality is just, if the beings want to activate us or want to contact us, they can. So all this UFO stuff and fighting stuff is just war stuff. It's just money. And it could be a distraction from all these other things that's happening simultaneously. or it is a cover up, and maybe there are stronger entities out there that we can't see, and they're doing really well covering it up, or shooting it down, or protecting us, depending on how you look at it. So so as far as UFO disclosure goes, I'm not the guy who fights for the answers. I'm not the guy who's going to say, you're lying to me. I'm the guy that's trying to understand what the government is telling, read between the lines, and get that information to fully understand what's going on, because they have the choice. I might know there's a document, but they don't have to give it to me. So when I ask for it, they don't have to give it to me, and they choose to give it to me. There's been situations where other people I know have asked for the same documents and they didn't give them to them. So there's also a selection. For some reason, I'm able to get them because then they know what I'm doing. They know I'm writing these books. And
so it's not similar to the FOIA process in the United States, then. It's a little different. Because
well,
the FOIA process, by law, the government has to provide the information, assuming that it's not classified or not covered.
Well, so it is the same in that sense. So they do have to provide it, but so it is an access to information request. But what I mean by saying they don't have to, what I meant by that is I have no way of knowing if it exists until they confirm by providing it. So they have it, and we have to trust that when they give it to me, that's it. That's all of it. But a lot of people think when you get no record found that they're lying. So it could be true that they're lying, or it could be true that the document doesn't exist. And that's tough, because if you trust the government, nobody can trust them 100%, but if you can trust that law that states that they're giving you something when you ask for it is all that is there, then we have the answers, because none of the information that we are receiving leads to extraterrestrial. It's just assumptions, or at least in my experience. I shouldn't say none. That's an all or nothing statement. I shouldn't say that, but I mean, it's just, at least I've been doing it long enough and hitting the same wall for a long time that I'm really certain that I should focus my efforts elsewhere, basically.
Yeah, so one of the things I wanted to mention and ask is, so there's plenty of evidence that for whatever reason, if you go all the way back to 1947 in Roswell, there was a cover-up of some sort. Now, I had Greg Lawson on the show. Last guest I had on the show, he wrote the book, Roswell, the After Action Report. He's an investigator. He's been an investigator for 30 years in law enforcement. He knows good law enforcement investigative techniques. And the investigative techniques that were used in that case were not good. I mean, they were, and it was obvious that there was some obfuscation. I'm sorry, I'm about to stumble over that word. And that there was some smoke and mirror type operations going on. You look at cases like the Phoenix Lights and how the government handled it, and the messaging and the conflicting messaging that went out. There's obviously been some sort of deception campaign going on for whatever reason, and I don't know all the reasons behind that, obviously. It sounds like from what you're saying, and if I understand it correctly, you don't really see that from the Canadian government. But would you agree there's been that kind of thing going on the U.S. side?
Yeah, on the U.S. side for sure. The Canadian government does the same as well. It's omission, I suppose, and that's where we get caught, because we're speculating and we're assuming because we have belief. But not just with the UFO stuff, like, officers mishandle cases all the time. As a private investigator, I've reviewed law enforcement, reports and found errors and got, members of the public off of some crimes and stuff like that because of mistakes. So there is a lot of error that could happen. So to rationalize that, I always ask the why. So with Roswell, from my, if memory serves me correctly, it was first reported as a flying saucer, and then all of a sudden reported as a balloon. So that pattern has repeated with what has happened with NORAD recently as well. Now, that could be a cover-up, or that could have been additional information that came forward. But the whole world is losing it and all this other stuff because of this belief and all these other things that happen and all this other stuff. And it's really hard to do that. But I'm not an expert on the Roswell case and looking at the evidence on that part. It's just, I always thought that a lot would go into it. Yes. So if they say that aliens exist, they would have to say Bigfoot exists, ghosts exist. They'd have to explain a lot. And it's a lot easier to say it doesn't exist. But if it doesn't exist, or it does exist, and they're not telling us, who's controlling it? And, so do we control them, or are they just doing whatever they want and slowly coming in to do what they need to? Because there's no control over that if they do exist in this realm. Or is the government allowing it? And then you get into those conspiracies where, we've made deals with our governments to allow the Greys to experiment on us in exchange for them coming in and back and forth. All those things come from that. That would mean the government allows it. So why would they cover it up? That's where I always come back to. Sure, they're covering it up. Sure, they're lying, but why? And if they're reasons that come up with me is A, it's their technology and they're experimenting with it. B, they don't want our adversaries to know they have it. Or C, it's part of something bigger that we have no idea about and we can't control it. Or D, they can't do anything about it. It's natural, it's organic, or there's a higher power and they can't do anything. And then there's an agreement that's set with them. And it's quite possible that our government, that's where the idea of shadow government comes in. There's another government that's controlling our government, that is allowing, we may not actually know what's going on, and we're just seeing the results of it, of a higher plan. So the only way we can really know, of course, is if they come and they show up and at the podium and tell the whole world, but they're probably not going to do that. What's happening is there is something or someone or some being is communicating with us, evolving us, educating us through the mind. For what purpose? I don't know. But with great power comes great responsibility. You can use your mind to be destructive, but you can also use your mind to be healing and powerful. So my focus is, if the voices are telling you to do bad, see a doctor. If the voices are telling you to do good, nurture that and spread life in the world. There's a lot going on in this world, and to cover up the UFOs on top of that, well, with everything else that's going on, it's either not a problem, doesn't exist, or nowhere close to what we think it is.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and obviously, I always think about if these things are operating with impunity over the skies and have been for, perhaps thousands of years, and the government is not going to come out and tell people, hey, we don't have control over what these things are doing. We don't have control over the skies. We really, truly don't have control over skies. Sure, we have NORAD. We're tracking objects in space, but these things are doing things that we can't do anything about. That's not really a message I don't think you want to be communicating to the masses.
No, because it shows that, we need to believe that they got it handled. We need to trust that. But that's what I was trying to say is, and I use the pandemic as another example, is like, when they come out to announce all these protocols and things to do, and then we all of a sudden we realize some of them don't make sense. Maybe it's because they don't really know and there's nothing they can do, and they have an option, tell you we're doomed, or give you some sort of hope so we stop fighting and reacting the way that we're reacting. And if they have control over introducing us to extraterrestrials, we need to handle a world problem a little bit better than we handled the pandemic. So there would have to be, so if they're working together, there would have to be something we need to do before they can introduce yourself, which is why I think there's this evolution of consciousness. Maybe there needs to be more of that before they introduce, because that's what they're here to do. If it doesn't exist, then like we're just animals in a cage.
Yeah. I hope it's not the latter. So, that brings up a good point, is perhaps they feel like people are just not ready right now. They're not ready to accept their reality, and maybe that's where it's going to get us.
And if that's a factor, then there's a decision. That means there's a group that makes these decisions. Otherwise, they could just come in, land, take our people, do whatever they want to do. They don't need to hide. They don't need to be in our minds. Which is why the psyop idea, because we have history that, you know, with MK Ultra, them experimenting, we know that it's possible. All we know is they stopped doing it. They didn't stop doing it. They just stopped talking about it publicly. So now, you know, it might still continue, right? You know, the wheel was invented thousands and thousands of years ago, but we still use it today. We just, you know, it still exists. Technology exists. So there's a lot of human explanation for all of the phenomena. But I know enough about it to think that I'm right, but I don't know enough to know if I'm really wrong, because there's still there's a lot. And I would rather believe that we are human beings, or extraterrestrials perhaps from another planet, that has the ability to empower and do so much better with our minds than what we're told to, than to believe that we're just slaves working and harvesting for, you know, an extraterrestrial race that needs gold and food, which is the other end of that spectrum of that fear, because that's what we're doing right now with humans. It doesn't have to be extraterrestrials. We have to work. We have to pay our taxes. We have to fund the war. You know, you don't need to be an extraterrestrial to do that. It's the same thing. Humans are doing it. You know, so my focus with the Experiencers Support Association, when you make these reports, again, with the investigation side, I'll reclassify to help me with this research so I can kind of understand things. But the cream of the crop is also connecting you to some pseudosciences to receive some therapy, in a sense, so you could stop feeling afraid, you can stop feeling anxious, you can stop wanting to end your life because you think that you're insane, you know. So and I'm creating this environment with a bunch of private resources, because they can't go public because they would lose their credentials. Because if I can't get the government to prove that aliens exist, and if the aliens are going to do whatever they're going to do no matter what, someone has to take care of the people. And if they are going to come forward and they are going to announce that this happens, they're going to need resources available to help us understand what it is. So my push is not to get the answer. My push is to be ready for when the answer comes, because everyone will lose their mind. Religion will be destroyed, you know, and there's so much chaos that will come out of our government telling us, you know, yes, we're not alone in the universe. So all the others are pushing to get that answer, and I don't know how violence and aggression is going to really work, because it just really, you know, they don't, you know, it just kind of, it's not a good approach in my opinion. But if it does happen, it's going to need people that are familiar with the phenomenon. It's going to need experiencers to say, I know what this has happened. This has happened to me too. We're going to need a group of people to take care of our people when that becomes reality. That's my main focus with the Experiencers Support Association.
Yep. Ryan, you're Canadian, so I have to ask the question. You had a public figure who came out and was very vocal about the UFO phenomena, Paul Hellyer.
Hellyer, yeah.
Very heavy into exopolitics towards the end of his life. What's your take on his, his public statements and the things he said about the phenomena?
I have to be reminded of what he thought exactly. I've met Paul several times before he passed. He actually has a cottage 30 minutes north of where I am, or we're used to, mind you. And when I received my first declassified document, I brought it to him because he was at an expo, and he looked at me and said, "How did you get this? You shouldn't have gotten this." And then we had a good talk about that. I do have actually in my file cabinet behind me all of the documents that was held by him or on him from the Canadian government. I haven't gone through them yet. So which particular claim do you want me to comment on?
Well, he was very vocal about the fact that there were multiple alien species that were visiting us, that they were as a whole peaceful, and that it kind of goes along the same lines as what Steve Greer was saying, and with his whole disclosure project, is these beings are peaceful. They are trying to advance us slowly but surely, and kind of break the chains, if you will, and kind of free us from the type of enslavement type of things we were just talking about. So I think it was kind of along those lines. I think it would be similar. I don't know if you're
Yeah.
familiar with the work of Stephen Greer.
So before Hellier was Wilbert B. Smith, and he was an engineer for the Ministry of Transportation as well, and he was heavily involved in the UFOs, and he was involved in Project Matchbook and Project Magnet, which is our Canadian Project Blue Book, basically, and Matchbook is our Canadian Operation Paperclip, just for reference, because they all happened at the same time. We just had different things. So after Wilbert Smith had resigned, Hellier took over. So Hellier had access to the research as well with Smith. Smith has passed, Hellier has passed, and then the new, I don't even remember who, was it Anid, or whoever Ministry of Defense is now. But anyways, so understanding that, to say what he said comes from a very powerful stance, comes from a very believable position. So on a probability scale, could that exist? Could he be telling the truth? We can't confirm that, but a lot of people will believe that because of where he's coming from. But he could still have made it up. But if he didn't make it up, then what I kind of mentioned or alluded to earlier is that then that would mean that there is a treaty, there is an agreement, there is a purpose, and someone is working forth for that higher power that we don't really know about, and he was just simply letting us know about, and of course not simply advocating towards it. So it's hard because we do get a lot of political people coming out and saying these things exist, and they have nothing else to lose. Can you stop them? Can you prove it? It's just, it's, and the government can ignore it, but if they ignore it, that doesn't mean it exists. It just means they got other things to do. I kind of think like I'm a business owner, so I have many employees, so I don't got time for that kind of philosophy. And I look at it that way, as the government's being a business. And if they ain't got time to talk about UFOs and stuff, then we got bigger problems than we realize. And I try to be grateful that they're doing whatever they can to protect us from whatever else is out there, because it's not Starship Troopers. We're not being attacked by aliens here. So, if the aliens had any negative thought, then thank you to the government for working with them to allow us to live here in peace. Vice versa, if the government wants to really hammer it to us like they used to, thank you to the aliens that's telling us human beings to be a little bit nicer. Because there's a reason, and we don't know that end game until we die. And when we die, do we reincarnate? Do we come back? Do we go to this place? Do we go to what happens? We don't know. And and I'm a big advocate against ending one's life before it's time. So let's not be in a hurry to get there, because we also don't know if there's anything. It could be nothing, and we get into these ideas where it's like, well, life sucks, and it'll be better on the other side. But do we really know what's on the other side? It also could be worse, because when we have these visions, when we have these prophets, we have all these things, we're pulling it from source. But we also don't know what time we're pulling it in, not just space. There's time. So when we pull a thought in, it could come from the future. It could come from the past. And another example of that I like to use is to normalize things. Is you're going to have. So imagine the scenario where you're in the United States. You're American.
Yes.
Yeah. So say at your place right now in America, my place here in Canada, we're ending our day simultaneously, same time zone or even different time zone, doesn't matter. And what you're going to do is you're going to pray at the end of the day, and you're going to ask God for a message to your question. You're going to openly open your heart, open your mind, and you're going to listen for a message because you need it. Meanwhile, same time, exact moment, I'm ending my day, I'm meditating, and I want to spread love and light out into the universe. And I send out a message. You receive that message, but you believe it to be God because you asked for God to give you that message. Meanwhile, simultaneously, I'm spreading love and light out. But how do you know that it's not God? You don't, you believe it. But it's all meanwhile, it's possible because many people within the world meditating all the time, sending thoughts here and out different ways. It's quite possible that we're intercepting it. And when I get into the paranormal investigations and stuff, and I always find that the people themselves are contaminating the room, because if they are spiritual, if they have the gift, if they are able to feed on energy, absorb energy, and expel energy, and they don't know, then it will contaminate the experiment. They use a seance board for an example, and 9 times out of 10, the one that's not a believer in that thing that happens to them, they have criteria in them that shows that they've had the sight, or they've had it. They just didn't realize it. And then they believe that they didn't have it, and then all of a sudden they weren't protected because they had that belief. So there's a lot of human things, but where is that stuff coming from? So are we communicating with each other, or are we communicating with extraterrestrials? Where did we come from? Did we come from here, or we come from extraterrestrials? God created us in our image, in our likeness. So we could very well be gods, which means we are the aliens. We, those that are in control of us could very well look like this. And these other beings that are being seen, again, could be from another place, another time, another planet. We don't know. But we all have the ability to go there. And the problem with that, especially as an investigator, is it cannot be proven unless all of us. So that's why when I work on the mind, I work with the people, I'm building a case so I can at least suggest that these people are from different places of the world. They're all doing the same thing, but yet they're receiving the same message, or they're receiving the same image. So when is this image? Where is this image? And if I ever get to a point where I would be in front of Parliament, I wouldn't be asking them to confirm. I would be asking them to acknowledge the existence and to assist with providing mental health support, because I've lost my mind thinking I was, with my experience, and it affects my credibility, especially when I have beliefs and stuff. Being open about this is really hard. A business has taken a lot of effects for it, but coming open about it is really challenging. It's really hard. But being a business owner, self-employed, working within government, but not for the government, I have a little bit of control, but it's still hard. And there's a lot of people out there that have credible jobs, can't come forward because they're at risk of losing it because they don't want to touch it. And why don't they want to touch it? Probably because it exists.
Yeah, and are you encouraged though, Ryan? I mean, do you see that, people's minds are opening up? I mean, I personally see more and more people opening their minds to this stuff. Maybe they, they do have a religious background, but it seems the more and more I talk to people, they at least seem to acknowledge that something's going on, and that perhaps we're not being told the truth about what's going on. But are you encouraged that it seems to be opening up more? People seem to be more open to more spiritual possibilities, if you will.
Yeah, and it's safe to do so. It's becoming more normalized, more meaningful, and a lot more people are doing it. And when I encourage that, it's a beautiful thing. It's leading towards a better future for humanity. And if it's guided by extraterrestrials, then that's divine. Listen to it, believe in it. Where I get these concerns is when they're telling you to do bad things, where is it actually schizophrenia? Or is it a divine being with negative intentions? Because there's always two sides. And so in the mix of all that, we have good and evil. We have, I often question whether or not mental health is actually a thing. It's just because it's our health, it's our mind that's actually affected. But if we don't have any guidance, we don't have any coaching, we don't have any therapy, then we can't get through it. Can't check the facts, can't do all that other stuff, and blah, blah, blah. So the challenge is believing that it's extraterrestrial, believing that, you know, that it comes from God or something like that, but also at the same time being able to discern whether or not, you know, having enough control to determine the intentions. When people want to harm themselves, there's a voice in their head. Is that voice theirs, or from a, you know, or is that a psyop? There's a lot of, you know, psychological warfare, you know, going on, and that's why I kind of want to work with people too, to kind of help the individuals protect their mind, because this is a threat. And even if it's not extraterrestrial, you could easily be manipulated by human beings, you know, many different things. So, as I said, I won't be able to prove. I don't think I'll be able to prove that all this stuff exists. I think that's for someone else to prove. The evidence that I have is that these people need help, and by working with them and understanding what they need help with, I'm learning more where to direct my focus, and it's more, you know, it's just more towards the people. And
all right, well, hey, we're getting a little bit short on time, Ryan. Talk to us about the Experiencer Support Association. Is it global? Can anybody report their experiences to you?
Yeah, so it is open source for anybody in the world to make a report. I do my investigations from here in Canada. Being trained as an investigator, I know what to look for. I know what I need. I don't have to get it. So I don't have to fly all the way to the UK to take a picture. I just need to know I need a picture, and I just ask you to take the picture for me. So there's a process that I do to work with the experiencers to get the information I need, as long as it's safe to do so, of course. And by doing that, it allows me to help everybody around the world without traveling, saves costs, all these other things too. And it also teaches the experiencer how to collect evidence, because one of my other things that I'm trying to fix is teaching people how to collect better evidence so we can actually measure. And you know, a lot of people know to pull out the phone and they take blurry photos, or they do stuff, they edit stuff. There's a lot of stuff that happens by the time I get pure good evidence. It's, you know, so I try to help people with that. So, and at the same time, if I can explain it away and you're part of the investigation, you'll understand that a little bit better, and there's a high probability that you'll believe that we think it's something normal. And if it's something we don't understand, it goes on my website, because I have a whole bunch of weird things that I can't explain, monsters, aliens, all these other things, because I know that I believe that these people are telling the truth. And if it's coming from their mind, whether it's a dream or something else, that doesn't matter to me. That's for it, but they're seeing something and I'm measuring the patterns, you know, then that goes on my website. So when you make a report on investigation side, then I'll make a referral to any of these resources that might be available to assist you in the immediate time, because the investigations take a while. And I'm backed up to like 2021 because of COVID. So I think I have 300 cases that are pending right now. But I'll get to every single one of them. Outside of that, the Experiencer Support Association is not just me. There are a few other writers on there. I can't name anyone yet because we haven't made the announcement, but we have a couple new writers coming. We have some people doing some workshops. We have an anthropologist who's also a cryptozoologist that's going to do some workshops there. I have a podcast called Beyond the Tinfoil Hat, where, you know, I kind of off the cuff dive deep into an experiencer testimony and try to figure out what it is live on the spot. We have another podcast called Carencia, which is for experiencers. We have a lot of private referrals, those in the medical field. And yeah, so experiencersupport.org is the website. You can find them, find me. And
Great. Well, hey, thank you so much for joining me tonight, Ryan. It's been a kind of a mind-blowing discussion, and very interesting.
I went off the rails a little bit. Sometimes it's kind of hard to focus my thoughts sometimes, because it's a mess.
No, I mean, there's that, you know what, it's there's so much you can, like you said, you can go down the rabbit hole so easily when you talk about this stuff. I do the same. Nevertheless, it's fascinating. It's thought-provoking, and it was all great discussion. So I really appreciate you joining me, and best of luck in all your future work.
Perfect. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you, Ryan.